Tension issues can happen to the best of us, but they're especially common with new knitters. So if you're looking down at your work and you're seeing something that you're not quite proud of, first of all, you're in good company. And second of all, don't give up. Now, as with all things, practice does make better, so over time, your tension will improve just as you get more comfortable with knitting, but who has the patience for that? Sometimes you just need to see results to keep going. So today I want to share 4 easy tension tips that I wish I knew sooner because it would have saved me a lot of time and headache. Luckily, I'm a little too stubborn to give up and I was able to work through these issues, but I recognize that is not for everybody. That's what I want to help you avoid. You don't need to suffer the frustration because there are some really simple things that you can do to improve your tension today. So it's important to keep in mind that a comfy grip keeps your stitches in check. So tension issues will arise as a result of fluctuations in that. As we get frustrated with something that we're knitting, we're getting frustrated with our project, we might tense up, we might hold the yarn a little bit tighter, and our tension and stitches are a little bit smaller as a result. But then say we get comfortable, maybe we have a glass of wine, or we're watching TV, and we're just relaxed. Well, then the yarn might flow freely through our fingers, we get a little bit more comfortable with things, and then the stitches loosen up, and you see that directly in your project. So if you're looking down at your project and you're seeing maybe stitches where some sections are a little bit tight and some are a little bit loose, this is probably what has happened. So let me tell you a story. When I first started knitting, I actually crocheted first, so I was really comfortable holding the yarn in my left hand. I'm a right-handed crocheter, right-handed person, so I hold the yarn in my left hand when I crochet, and so that felt really natural to me. So when I learned how to knit, I taught myself the continental style of knitting, which is where you hold the working yarn in your left hand, in my case, or your non-dominant hand, and it feels more natural generally for crocheters to knit that way. But what I found was that I am a really bad continental knitter. It is not super comfortable for me, probably because I didn't do it for long enough. So I experimented with other ways, and what I have found to be the most comfortable way for me to hold the needles is with holding the yarn in my right hand as well. So the way I do this is basically constantly feed the stitches from my left hand here. I'll just sort of slide them up the needle and just flick the working yarn around that needle. And it's crazy. Once I started knitting like this, it was like the floodgates opened. It was so much more natural, I guess, to knit up a project, and it was just so much more comfortable. I could knit so much faster, and this is not to say anything against continental knitting, the style, or anybody who knits that way. This is just what's comfortable for me. So I tried both continental and this, flick style of knitting, and of the two, for me personally, I felt like this was more natural. So that's what I would encourage you to try. Even if you feel like you like how you're knitting right now, whether it be continental or American style or flick knitting, or there's so many different other options, give the other options a try just to see if perhaps one feels a little bit more natural. And you're going to have to do more than just a few stitches. If you're working on a project, you probably don't want to change things up mid-project because your tension will definitely show as a result of making some of these changes. Once you figure out which hand feels the most natural to hold the working yarn in, then you can experiment with how you hold the yarn. Because think of tension this way. However the yarn flows through your fingers and the tension that's on the yarn as that happens, that directly impacts your stitches. So there's something that I like to do that really helps me keep my tension in check, and I think it's just something super simple that you can try. So what I'll do is I'll take my yarn holding hand and I will just wrap the working yarn around my pinky, and that's it. So for me, I'm just, placing the yarn over my finger so that I can knit in the style that's comfortable for me. But let's say you do like to continental knit, Then you might do the same thing, but in the other hand. So you would just knit like this. So the pinky wrap here does one main thing, and that is to sort of serve as a bump guard, if you will, based on how your yarn is coming to you. So right now I've got a lot of really loose yarn here. I do recommend having some yarn sort of out here, whether it be on your table as you're knitting or on your lap as you're knitting. If you have a free, constant, sort of unbothered flow of yarn from the skein, my words are not working today, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? If the yarn is just freely flowing and it's coming to your hand at the same rate, and it's not, you know, fighting with the skein or rolling across the floor or getting stuck between, you know, maybe the side of the couch and your leg, then you can really keep your tension steady and keep it in check. So anytime I start, or well, anytime I run out of yarn here, I'll just grab a little bit more, set the skein aside, and keep going with my project. So those are two quick little things you can do. Once you determine which hand you're most comfortable holding the yarn in, then just add the pinky wrap and see if that helps. And also grab you some free yarn so that you have a free flow movement of yarn to your hand. Now, one thing to mention about the pinky wrap too, when I'm working with a worsted weight yarn like I am here, something that's medium, number 4, I generally just wrap once. But if I'm knitting with a much smaller yarn or thinner yarn, something that's, you know, a lightweight or fingering weight or a sock weight, you'll often find me wrap that twice. And that's just because I need a little bit of extra tension to keep my tension the same way as I do with a thicker yarn, if that makes sense. And then sometimes if I'm knitting with a really thick yarn, say a chunky weight or a super bulky weight, you might see me just grab it like this, where I'm sort of holding it between these two fingers, kind of as I pinch it down and knitting that way. So I do that with thicker yarns. These are all grips that you can try, and it doesn't matter what yarn weight you have. Just, you know, whatever works best for you. Try a single wrap, and if that feels like you have a lot of control with the yarn and that the stitches are sort of knitting up in the same way, then maybe that's your way. If that feels a little bit too restrictive and you feel like you're fighting the yarn, then maybe try just holding on to it like this and knitting this way. Or if you feel like you have very little control, try wrapping it twice. You'll notice as you try these things, it feels very different as it comes through your hand. When I have 2 wraps here, it slows the yarn down and it keeps a lot of tension on here, and I don't really have to do much with my fingers to help with the tension. The yarn wrapped around my pinky just kind of does that for me. But I know, just because I've tried all of these ways, that if I'm using a medium weight yarn like that, my stitches will be even tighter. Sometimes that throws off my gauge. So moral of the story here, experiment with your grip. Play around with which hand you have your working yarn in, which one feels the most comfortable for you. There's no right or wrong answer. Whatever feels best to you, that is the right answer. And then once you figure that out, then experiment with how the yarn is flowing through your fingers. If you feel like you have no control whatsoever and your stitches are a little bit loose as a result of that, then you might find that wrapping the yarn around your pinky once or twice will really make a big difference. And the last thing, I know this tip is very multifaceted, but the last thing is to have some yarn from the skein of yarn just ready and sitting in your lap, ready to go. That way you're not forcing the yarn from the skein or from the ball of yarn, and you can help keep your stitches a little bit more tidy as a result. All right, so the second thing you can try right now to improve your tension is, and this one might surprise you, but check your posture. Your posture can play a pretty significant role in how you knit, how you feel as you knit, and that can indirectly impact your tension. So think about it. If you're knitting and you're kind of hunched over and you're really thinking about your project, or maybe you've got a lot of tension in your shoulders and you're really kind of muscling your stitches, remember, tension is the direct result of the yarn that's flowing through your hands and going to your project. And they need to do so in a consistent way. So if you're sort of hunched over, or you're uncomfortable, or you're fighting your posture, you're fighting your chair, you're not super comfortable, then your tension could possibly suffer as a result. And look, I am the queen of bad posture, so I really struggle with this one quite a bit. I always have to remind myself to sit up straight, drop my shoulders, right? I have this really bad habit of letting my shoulders eat my neck. So I have to remember to drop my shoulders and just relax. If I relax my arms, then I will typically also relax my project. And I kind of have to break the rules a little bit the way I'm sitting here, just so you can see what I'm doing, both, and at both angles. So you can see that I'm actually sitting up straight and have my shoulders back. Normally I would have my hands, my elbows tucked in a little bit closer to my body, but I'm having to reach a little bit further here, just so you can see what I'm doing from above. So give that a try. I think you'll find that if you relax your posture, then you have more freedom and flexibility to relax your hands, and good tension really is the result of being relaxed and comfortable as you knit. So when you're stressed, when you're frustrated, if you're having a bad day, if you've got something annoying going on in the background that's distracting you, there's any number of things that could come into play that could just tighten up your grip on the needles, tighten up the grip in your yarn hand so that maybe the yarn isn't flowing quite the same to your project as it normally is. And this little hack, this little trick, it's the one that I was the most resistant to trying, because, like I said, I'm the queen of bad posture, and I love to slouch and I love to be comfortable when I knit. But sometimes being too comfortable can mean your tension will suffer. So the best thing to do is just to remind yourself, give yourself little reminders to sit up, drop your shoulders, have your hands in a comfortable position. Put some props under your arm if you need to, like if you're sitting on a chair and it has some arms on it, that's probably the best way to go. But if you're sitting on the couch, just prop up a couple of pillows underneath your elbows. Just make it a more comfortable experience for you, and then I think you'll see that your stitches will relax and you'll sort of fall into your natural tension, where you're not fighting the yarn and making really tight stitches, but you're also not, so relaxed and just letting the yarn fly all over the place that your stitches are a little bit too loose. So with this next quick and easy change that you can make to improve your tension, we're going back to basics again like we did before, but this time talking specifically about the needle material. Now you likely already have a pair of needles that you feel comfortable with and that you're knitting with right now, but have you experimented with other needle materials? There are a few exceptions, but generally there's 3 main types of material that you might find knitting needles made out of. First of all, you've got wood, and that covers all sorts of different types of wood. You've got your plastic needles, and then you've got your metal needles. Now, I always encourage new knitters to try all 3, because you never know which one is going to feel the most comfortable for you. And it's all personal preference. There's no right or wrong answer, but you generally will find one material that just clicks a little bit better for you. So if you don't already have one of each of these types of materials as far as knitting needle goes, I'd encourage you to try to pick up a pair if you can. Definitely don't buy like a full set or spend a lot of money on it. You can get a single pair of needles that are in all 3 categories that you can get some practice with and not have to, spend a whole lot of money in doing so. But I do think that if nothing else, it's a really good way of figuring out what material is the most comfortable for you and how you knit and how the yarn will glide across those materials. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's all personal preference. It's all what feels comfortable and natural to you, but you will never know unless you try all three materials in your project. So I mentioned briefly before that it's best to not incorporate a lot of changes in your current project if you want it to look consistent, because as you're working through some of these tips and some of these tricks and finding your way and the most comfortable way to knit, you will see changes within your project. So this next tip is just to swatch in practice. But look, I totally get it. Making swatches is kind of boring and it doesn't always seem like the best use of yarn. So I've got a perfect solution with these little swatches that I have been playing with throughout this video. These are actually washcloths, fully functional washcloths that are, just oversized swatches. So I would encourage you to try to find maybe like a 100% cotton that you may already have in your stash and knit up a washcloth as you're going through some of these changes, because you know what, even if they don't look perfect as you're working through your tension, maybe one washcloth is a little bit wonky and they get better and better the more you knit, well, you still have something useful and functional in order to figure all of this stuff out, and you're not changing these things in a project that really means a lot to you, that you really want to look perfect. So I've got a free pattern for this. Obviously, it's a very, very simple pattern, something that a true beginner can absolutely knit, but you'll cast on 40 stitches and you'll basically knit up the length of the washcloth. I will have the pattern linked in the description below if you want to check it out. It's a great way to learn how to read patterns if you're unfamiliar with that, because it's super simple to follow. But I think the most important thing to realize here is it's not about perfection. It's about making small and incremental improvements. And as you're working on a project like a washcloth, it's okay if it doesn't look absolutely perfect. It's still going to function as you need it to, because the bottom line, yes, all of these tips, all of these simple changes will definitely help if you aren't already trying them or haven't already tried them. They will help with your tension. But the thing that you don't want to hear, that I probably need to tell you anyway, is that practice does make better. So the more you knit, the better you'll feel, the more muscle memory you'll have as you're knitting your stitches, and the better your tension will be overall. So working on a project like a washcloth feels productive. It is productive because you're knitting an actual thing that you can use, but you're also sort of working through your tension issues as a result. So swatch and test, be kind to yourself, don't overly criticize. If, one swatch doesn't work out, you're experimenting here. You're trying different grips to see which one works the best. You're trying different needle materials to see which one works the best for you. And that's what it's all about. You're not trying to be perfect, you're just trying to get incrementally better. Now, if you are knitting a washcloth like this, you're likely using 100% cotton. That's what I would recommend because, cotton is very durable, it's very washable, it dries quickly and that sort of thing. The fiber of the yarn will also feel different as you knit with it. You probably already noticed this before, but maybe if you haven't experimented with all types of fibers, you might not realize that the fiber interacts with the needle and the needle material, and they sometimes call this drag, and it's just a fancy way of saying how much the yarn sticks to the needle. But the other thing to consider too is the stretch that the fiber has. So with a 100% cotton yarn, you don't have a ton of stretch, and so that can inadvertently make your stitches feel and maybe even look a little bit tighter because it just doesn't have a lot of stretch to it. Whereas if you're knitting with an acrylic or an acrylic blended yarn, you'll notice maybe a little bit more stretch, and so you might have to adjust your grip or perhaps your tension a little bit to work with those materials. And then if you've ever worked with like 100% merino wool, for example, a wool yarn has a lot of inherent stretch to it. And you know, another thing, since the yarn is flowing through your hand and that directly impacts how the yarn is flowing to your project and making the stitches, the moisture level of your hands can really play a pretty big role in your tension. You might notice that if you start knitting right after you put lotion on your hands, that the yarn sticks to your hand a little bit more. Whereas if your hands maybe are a little bit dry, if you're knitting in winter or something like that, it might flow a little bit more freely. Or if you have maybe sweaty hands, you're knitting in the summer, then yeah, the yarn will stick a little bit more to your hands. So these are just a couple of little nuances that you'll have to deal with as you continue knitting throughout the years. It's not really something that you change necessarily, but just things that you get used to and that you sort of learn to navigate around. But the bottom line, obviously, with all things, practice does make better. So just keep knitting. Don't worry about how perfect it looks. Don't be overly critical of your projects, especially your first ones. They will get better over time, and the only way they'll get better over time is if you don't put down your needles and you keep knitting. So there we have it. Those are 4 really quick changes plus a couple of little bonuses on how you can change and improve your tension today as you're knitting through your project. Don't forget the pattern for this washcloth can be found at the link in the description below. Check that out if you want to make a really useful swatch to practice some of these tips, and let me know which you're going to try first and maybe which has really helped you with your tension in the past. Happy knitting, and I'll see you in the next one.